Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. The media is rife with stories about women who are in relationships with men who are either in prison or have been. TV series like Prison Wives and the Prison Wives Club have documented their experiences, while fans of the Real Housewives of Atlanta have followed the relationship of Phaedra Parks, a successful lawyer, and Apollo Nida, who she married shortly after his release from prison. Are these women misguided, or can there be real love in these relationships? And do we as a society need to rethink our attitudes towards the incarcerated and the formerly incarcerated? Sheila Rule, a former foreign correspondent for the New York Times, thinks we should. She is married to a prison inmate, and she is co-founder and executive director of the Think Outside the Cell Foundation. Welcome. So, Sheila, the foundation grew out of your relationship with your husband, Joseph Robinson, who is serving time at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. Tell me how you met.
First, thanks so much for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be able to talk about these important topics. Joe, who actually has now moved to Fishkill Correctional Facility in Beacon, New York, Joe and I met as a result of my involvement with the Riverside Church Prison Ministry. About 13 or 14 years ago, I was asked to join the prison ministry. They were looking for volunteers, and I decided to join. Because I was a journalist, therefore writer, they asked me to respond to letters that they received from people who were in prison, and so I did. And I got so many letters, and through that correspondence, I really got a front row seat to the humanity, the power, the skill, the potential of men and women behind prison walls. And at some point, I got a letter from Joe Robinson, who was looking to correspond with someone. So as I was doing with scores of other people, I corresponded with Joe. That's how we met, and our relationship grew from that. So it was actually, when I started reading those letters, and this was before meeting Joe, I saw, and I began to believe and feel that for me, writing letters was not enough, that I needed to do more. And so I was inspired by those letters to think about an organization or greater work, meaningful work. And then Joe came along, and we did it together.
Okay. Now, as you corresponded for a while, and for about a year before you met,
Sure.
And then the relationship developed from there. When your relationship with Joe was developing through your letters and your visits to the prison, did you ever say to yourself, "Oh, I don't know if I want to be, I'm getting drawn into this relationship with somebody who is in prison and maybe I shouldn't"? Did you ever resist that impulse?
No, I never resisted the impulse because he was incarcerated. That, to me, was not an issue. I, having been a journalist for so many years, and having met so many people, I was clear about his humanity and who he was as a human being. My issue actually was there's an age difference. And so it wasn't, so my...
And the age difference is you're 20 years
I'm 20 years older.
Okay.
So my resistance had nothing to do with incarceration.
Okay.
It was more kind of the societal pressure of someone who was raised in the 50s and 60s. You know, the movies and the chatter was always, the man is older, the man is taller.
The man makes more money.
The man
right,
makes more money,
right.
all of those things. So I really didn't realize I had bought into that until a dear friend said to me, "You know, you're always talking about Joe. He really is such a great guy, but you seem resistant." And I said, "Oh, well, you know, I mean, why would I go with somebody that, you know, be with somebody who's 20 years younger?" And she said, "Why? Why?" And I began to think about it. And so I was really surprised and a bit upset with myself when it boiled down to because society says so.
Okay, okay. Now, as you two became more and more serious and you start thinking about getting married and maybe talking about it with your friends, how did your friends and relatives react to that idea?
I have always considered myself to be surrounded by some of the most progressive, forward-thinking people on the planet. So you can imagine my surprise when most of them were, "What is your problem? Why? I can see you, okay, you can have a little relationship with him, but marry him? Why would you do that? You can do better. There's nothing wrong with you. Are you desperate?" It was stunning. It was stunning.
How about your son? How did your son react?
My son was cool.
Okay.
He was, okay. Because actually it was Sean, my son is Sean, my son Sean, who had, Sean was about 12 or 13, and Sean said, I'd like to write him and ask him for a little advice. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what made you make the decision to jump the broom, as we would say, to take the plunge and get married instead of just continuing the letter writing, the correspondence?
Well, I guess I would pose the question, if Joe were home, is he someone I would have married? Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So that what he brings to the table, he brings to the table, regardless of the circumstances.
Some years ago, about 15 years ago, I read Asha Bandele's memoir, The Prisoner's Wife. And I have watched Prison Wives, a series of hour-long profiles about women, and I think there was one man whose spouses are in prison. And from that show, I came away with the following impressions, that some of these are women, well, a lot of them were women whose whole lives seemed to be consumed by caring for the needs of the incarcerated person. Planning long trips to the prison, getting there, buying food for conjugal visits, buying clothes so you look nice for him, putting money into his commissary account, paying for his collect phone calls, doing legal research aimed at helping him to get out earlier. I know there was one woman who she had children, and she would take them with her on visits to the prison, and whenever his prison changed, she would move, and they'd move to a different location so they'd be close by. To an outsider, these can seem like very one-sided, even exploitative relationships. I don't know if you have seen some of those. How do you feel about it? I guess maybe the answer is some of them are, others aren't.
Yes, I would say that what you find in prisons and in prison relationships, you find the diversity in that setting the same as you find on the outside. In prison, you're going to find people who are particularly motivated and go-getters and smart and getting their masters, etc. You're also going to find couch potatoes. You're going to find people who really are looking for the easy way out. In relationships as well, you're going to find relationships that are exploitative, and you're going to find relationships that are unions of doers, as I'll call them, who are really doing good things, not only for their families, but for the betterment of society. And I would put us in that category. I have always felt enriched and particularly blessed by this relationship. I consider it a gift, actually, because what it has done, in addition to the love and support that it provides, it has really put me in touch with a range of abilities and capabilities that I have that, as a reporter or correspondent for the New York Times, I didn't even think about. So I am particularly rich and grateful.
You've been married how many years?
10 years.
Wow. How often do you see each other?
Usually about every other week.
Oh,
We see
that's
each
a
other about
lot.
every other week. Yeah.
That's a lot. And you're able to have conjugal visits where you
Yes,
go and
we
stay?
have conjugal visits. That is, unlike most states, New York has it's called Family Reunion Program. Most states do not. I think it's about 5 or 6 states that allow it. So we're lucky.
And he's in Fishkill?
He's in Fishkill.
And how far away is that?
That's on Metro North, about an hour and a half.
Okay.
So it's convenient.
Okay. Where did the idea of starting Think Outside the Cell come from?
Joe and I decided to start this organization because we were very clear about the stigma that is attached to people who are or were in prison. And
what is that stigma? How would you describe it?
Well, right, and it is the stigma that really kind of propels this network of, or spider web, you might call it, of laws and policies that restrict or deny equal opportunity to people who are incarcerated. So that, so what is the stigma? The stigma is basically what I felt when I said I was in love with Joe Robinson. It's that fear, it's that attitude that this person is less than, once a criminal, always a criminal. That is the stigma, that you don't deserve it. What you have done keeps you on the bottom rung for the rest of your life. You are branded as a criminal, as an ex-felon for the rest of your life. That's how it plays out. So that not only are you branded, what does that mean? It means you're marginalized. It means you can't get a job. It means you can't get housing. It means you have to jump hoops to try to get into college, public benefits, voting. It means you are a second-class citizen.
Okay. And so the mission of the foundation, I would assume, would be both to change the attitudes that people have towards people who've been in prison and to change some of the public policy affecting them.
That's right. To work to bring awareness about this population and the discrimination, and to change the barriers that they're faced with.
On your website, Ronald Day, who spent some time in prison, is now out. He has a job. He's studying for his PhD. Says, when you give people a chance, they can do well. What are some of the things that society can do to give formerly incarcerated people more of a chance?
I think one of the first things they can do is take a look at their own attitudes. Take a look at their own attitudes and how those attitudes play out. I think back to a college student at Rutgers University. This was last semester. I was helping a really progressive professor with his class, and they were doing a project involving the formerly incarcerated. This student said, I would never let someone who'd been in prison around, never let that person be around my child. After interviewing someone, after having that person in the class, following that person around, I think this kid was a photographer, so by the end of the class, he said he could take care of my kid anytime. So, one of the things I would ask people, ordinary human beings, to do is to think about their prejudices, their biases, and also I would ask them to think about what kind of society they want to live in. Do they want a society where the person who's walking down the street, sitting next to them on the subway, taking their kid to school with their kids, does that person feel part of society? Does that person feel invested? Or is the person you're sitting next to desperate? Can't find a job, can't take care of his kids. What's he going to do? His back is against the wall. What kind of society? Think about those things. And once you give it some thought, my hope is that you'll see the benefit for all of us. To
We're
make
going to
a
talk
change.
more about what people can do to end the stigma after a short break. Then we'll be back with Sheila Rule after the following message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Cheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. I'm talking with Sheila Rule, Executive Director of the Think Outside the Cell Foundation. You know, as you pointed out, one of the biggest problems formerly incarcerated people face is finding work because employers, you know, they don't want to hire people who have criminal records. A few cities, including New York, are talking about legislation that would prohibit employers from asking job applicants if they have a criminal record. Do you think that's a good idea, or do you think employers have the right to know if somebody they're thinking about hiring has a criminal history?
I think the issue is that it too often is blanket, that an employer will deny someone without even considering what that person brings to the table. It's like, okay, you're formerly incarcerated, okay, goodbye. I think of there was a case in Pennsylvania. I talked to a young man who was worked for a temp agency. That temp agency named him Employee of the Year. He was currently working at an organization, at a company that wanted to hire him full time. Found out he had been incarcerated. They fired him. Now, this is somebody who was temp Employee of the Year, who they wanted to hire. It didn't matter once they found he was formerly incarcerated. So putting these laws on the books matters. More than that, enforcement matters. So it's not only putting the laws on the books, but also enforcement.
Okay. I know that in New York City, in the public housing projects, there are prohibitions on parolees or felons living in public housing. I think the condition, if they committed their crimes there. I don't know if this holds for all publicly subsidized housing projects around the country. But, you know, if you committed a crime while you were living, maybe your mother was living in the project, you go to prison and you can't go back to that housing project. Do you have any feelings about that prohibition? Do you think that should be changed?
Yeah, and actually the prohibition is state by state, public housing authority by public housing authority, city by city. So you have a kind of a range, this kind of motley group of laws and restrictions, but a lot of them do boil down to people with certain kinds of crimes not being able to live in public housing. I think New York City has some type of pilot program to try to ease that situation. But clearly, with whether we're talking about employment or housing or education, public benefits, etc., what we're talking about is a fair shot, a fair chance. If people have transformed their thinking and they've transformed their lives, they're looking for an opportunity to restart their lives. If we were in their shoes, would we want to be defined forever by the worst thing we ever did? Would we want an opportunity at a second chance? I think most people would say that makes sense.
How about educational opportunities for both inmates and people who have been incarcerated? Are they what they should be, or what would you like to see done in that area? Yeah,
clearly we need a lot more support when it comes to education. In New York State, there are some programs, but I think what fails to happen, not only in New York State, but throughout the country, people are not necessarily prepared for reentering and for reintegration. What happens is they're warehoused so that they don't have the skills. In New York, people who've been in prison a long time have never seen email, have never been on the internet. This database society will be all the more difficult. So, and then for many, as the Center for Community Alternatives has done great work on the whole issue of higher education. When they come home and they face so many barriers in terms of getting into college, continuing their college educations. There's a young man who's done great work, and he attempted to get into college, and he jumped through so many hoops. He eventually did get in and was an honor student. So it is, and it's been shown that there is nothing to fear. Once these people are on, these men and women are on college campuses, there is nothing to fear. Statistics show that.
Tell me about, now, think outside the cell. Does it have a paid staff? Is it strictly volunteer? What kind of funding do you have?
Right, it is volunteer mostly volunteer. What we've tended to do is when we have a project or a certain program we're doing, we'll bring in part-time staff to help specifically with that project. And ultimately, our goal is to have a much larger organization where we do have paid staff, so that we have been working with volunteers, with grants, etc.
You publish books.
Right.
Tell me about.
One of the things we decided at the very beginning was, who better to tell the story than someone who's living it, so that our books really raise the voices of people who are or were incarcerated and their families and loved ones, because they have important things to say. So we've done books. We've also, we have a short documentary. It's only about 11 or 12 minutes. It's on our website, thinkoutsidethecell.org. And that's intended to really create dialogue and conversation around this whole issue of collateral consequences, discrimination, et cetera. We also have done symposiums. We've done Prison to Prosperity Fair, which is a project of Think Outside the Cell that is intended to help men and women help themselves. So last year we did one on entrepreneurship, and we had some of the titans of entrepreneurship as judges. We did a Shark Tank, so that yeah, we try to be as creative as possible to tackle this issue.
One of the biggest controversies of Mayor de Blasio's administration centered around the live-in boyfriend of his wife's chief of staff. This is Rachel Nordlinger. And her live-in boyfriend had served time for manslaughter and I think for drug trafficking, and has had a few run-ins with police since then. This became a big controversy, and she was actually forced to resign. When someone holds a high-profile position in a public administration, do you think the criminal background of his or her significant other is a legitimate political issue?
I think that what happens is, in her case, I saw it as a lot more complicated than that. That was convenient. It was helpful to those who opposed her, but I think it had as much to do with her past affiliations.
With Al Sharpton? Exactly.
I think that this became a storm, and that these elements, the incarceration, what other comments he was making on websites, etc., the work she had done with Reverend Sharpton, I think that it created this storm, and I think that this incarceration was part of it. Now the question, is his incarceration relevant? I guess it depends on whether he is playing some important role in the work. If he's not, then it goes back to, is a record relevant when you're looking for a job? I mean, if you have been incarcerated, if you've been in and out of prison for robbing banks, maybe you
probably don't want to go
right.
go
maybe
work
you
for a
shouldn't
bank.
work for a bank.
Right.
You know.
So you've been married for 10 years. What kind of future do you envision for yourself and your husband?
Terrific future, actually. You know, I, regardless of, you know, what Joe did or his circumstances, I know what I've got. He's a great human being. This is a man who has worked so hard at being a good human being. He is filled with gratitude for all that he's been given, and by that I mean not only the family he now has, but also the intellect he has. He's a very smart man. The skills that he brings to the table, the spirit of motivation. He's a special person, and he is really, I would say, driven to give back and make a difference. So, as are we both.
I assume you're always looking for volunteers to work.
We are
in this mission.
We are. We're always looking for volunteers, and we're always looking for people who want to do work around these issues, whether they're working with us, in collaboration with us, working for other organizations. We want more and more people around the table who get it, so that we can help make sure others get it.
Okay. We're out of time. I want to thank Sheila Rule, the Executive Director of the Think Outside the Cell Foundation. If you're interested in learning more about the Foundation's work, you can go to their website at thinkoutsidethecell.org. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.